So I'm going to take you through setting up for fingers. That's the difficult part. And I've done this as a class quite a few times. And you can apply this to any glove pattern that you're working on. When you set up for fingers, you have the number of stitches that go across the back of your hand. And then you're dividing those between the 4 fingers. But the fingers are not flat, they've got space in between. And you need extra stitches to accommodate that space, otherwise your fingers are tight. So that's what we're going to work on. I grew up in a family that knitted gloves, serious gloves, and this is how I was learnt to knit those gloves. So I've knitted a vague sample of a glove. This won't end up as a product, this is just to show what happens. I've knitted to the top and I've done the first finger. The first finger is quite simple. It's the next fingers that are a little more complicated. So here's the start of your round. This is here. And I always learn to do the first finger first. You can do the little finger first, it makes no difference. But to do this finger first, you knit that half of the stitches. And then you put the rest on a thread. And you come to this side. You knit across the stitches that you need for the thumb, and you cast on 2 stitches. Then you knit your finger. So there's 2 stitches cast on between the stitches that are on the body. So that's the stitch at the back, and this is a stitch at the front. And I've got 2 extra stitches in here. That gives you space for the space between your fingers. For the second finger, you put the stitches that you're going to work on your needles. And then your starting point is here, because you knitted the first finger around to there. So we start here. But you need to do something with that big gap first. And this is the little tricky bit. I had cast on 2 stitches, sometimes called E-stitches, and you got that little loops at the bottom. So you've got 1 stitch there and 1 stitch there that flows up, 2 stitches in there. And what we're going to do is knit into the bottom of those stitches. But the easiest way to do that is to pick up that bar. So you've got 1, 2, 3 bars. And you're going to knit those 2 together. You're going to knit those 2 together, but only drop off 1. And then knit those 2 together and drop them both off. And that's your 2 stitches. You still have, in between, you still have a gap. And you need to pick up a stitch. Lots of us would pick up a bar there or pick up a bar here. And it still leaves a bit of a gap. What I do is, and I've knitted this stripes of colour so you can see the stitches. I pick up from the row below, that's a stitch in the row below, and I pick up the outside, the left hand part of that stitch. I twist around and I pick up the right hand bar of the stitch above. And I cast 1 off over the other. You have to move it round so it's in the right way to knit, and that has closed up that gap. I do the same at the other side, because you've got a big gap at this side. So here I see it's different stitches that you use, but it's still 2 stitches, one above the other. There's a grey stitch there and a yellow stitch there. I pick up the left hand side of that stitch, turn around and pick up the opposite side of the stitch below, and again pass one stitch, if I can get my needle in, there, over the other. Turn it round on your needle so that it's facing the right direction to knit, and that's closed up. So now we start knitting. That stitch that we picked up, pass that over to the other needle, and this is where the first finger starts. So we start here and knit the stitches that are set out for the finger. I just have 6 on. And then you cast on 2 stitches. With your finger on your right hand, just make a loop and pass it on. It's often called an E-stitch. You need 2 of them. If you cast on any other way, you don't have the 3 bars to pick up. Then round to the second needle, knit the stitches for the finger. But the last 2, that's the last stitch that you've picked up, that you've allocated for the finger, and the one that we picked up, you knit those 2 together. Closes up that gap further. Then you need to knit these 3 bars that we picked up from the cast on stitches. And you're going to knit into, that's the 3 bars, you're going to knit into 2 bars, but you're only going to drop off 1 of those bars. Then you knit into the 2 bars that are left, and you drop them both off. Then you have the stitch that you picked up and the first stitch that you knitted, and you're going to decrease that. You're going to knit that 2 together. That closes that gap up. And then you're knitting round your finger. Knit your finger the length you need it. That's that 2 bars, 2 cast on stitches. They're a little loose, but they tighten up when you go around the corner and when you pick up those bars to knit the next finger. So this is where you can rewind that piece of a video and look at it again and again. You can see you've got more stitches on the back than the front. You can rearrange that to make it an even number. So you pass 1 from each end, because these are the cast on stitches. If you pass 1 from here, take it round the corner. I'll knit it because it's here. And 1 of these 2 cast on stitches, if you take it around the corner onto the other needle, then this looks a lot better. You've got even number of stitches on each needle. So you knit your finger. This is why I don't like knitting fingers. It's just knit a few stitches, turn and knit a few stitches. It gets a little boring for me somehow. That's why I always ever do short fingers if I was going to, but I would prefer just a piece of rib at the top. So with a few rows knitted, we'll go and look at that space between the two fingers. That stitches in between the two fingers. There's no gaps, there's no holes. If there is, you have an end here that you need to fasten off, and you can fill in any gap with this end. And in between each finger, there is the start of the next finger. So you've got a thread in between each finger to tighten up any gaps. So you're left with a neat space in between those fingers. And it's just wide enough to fill the space between the fingers on your hand. So that's the fingers, and it's the same for each finger as you go. I also set in a thumb here, and mostly what I do for the thumb is knit in an extra piece of thread that I can pick out, and I have an opening. And I did the same here. I did different colours so you can see the rows. Pick up the stitches below and above the thread. So this, I'm just picking up that grey stitch. And how many did I put in? I put in 6. I thought it was a nice small number to get around. And at the other side, you can pick up 6 as well. But you end up picking up half bars at the side, so you'll end up with 7. So if I start to unpick that, you can see half a stitch there. So I'll pick up that half stitch, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a half at the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is 7. Then you can pull this out or pick it out. I thought this thread would pull. That doesn't, but I've broken it at each end. And then you can pick the stitches. Sometimes you need to pick these stitches out as you pick up the top finger, top row of stitches. So that's the stitches picked up, but you've still got gaps at the edge. And to fill those gaps, you need to pick up another stitch. And I do exactly the same as I did for the in between the fingers. You can see a grey stitch there, a grey stitch there and a yellow stitch here. So I pick up the outside of the yellow one and the inside of the grey one, and pass one over the top of the other. And I put it on the front needle, the bottom needle. Same at the other side. In the gap, I've got a grey stitch and a yellow stitch. So I pick up the outside of the grey stitch, turn your needle round, and pick up the inside of the yellow stitch and cast one of those over the other and put it on that bottom needle. So I now have 8 on here and I have 7 on the back. And I want to take that back down to the original 6 and 6, but I don't do it immediately because you need extra space around here. Most people see this as a thumb that's not in the right place. They see a thumb that comes out the side of your hand. But I mean, usually if you're holding on to something, that thumb is coming into the palm of your hand. You're never working all the time with your thumb there. But if you have extra stitches on here, it gives enough room. If you decrease them too quickly, this is tight. So I'll always start on the inside and and let me put in this colour, take a different colour. Knit across your 8, knit 1 full round with all the stitches that's there. So it's 8 on the front needle, on the first needle, and 7 on the second needle. That first stitch and last stitch on that second needle is a half stitch, and if you just knit it, you'll leave a gap. So twist it, knit into the front and twist that stitch, and that will close it up. Knit to the end stitch, and again it's a half a stitch, and I knit into the back of that one. So you still have 8 stitches and 7 stitches. 2 more on this needle than I want to end up with, and 1 more on the other needle. So on the next round I will decrease 1 stitch in the middle of the needle with the most stitches on. Keep tension on that thread. So somewhere in the middle there's 3 stitches, and I'll knit 2 together, so I've got rid of 1. And on this round I don't decrease on the second needle. I knit it straight across. So I have decreased 1 stitch on this front needle. So I have 7 and 7. So I have 2 more stitches to decrease. The next round I'll decrease on this needle. So you are slowly bringing those stitches down, so you leave more fabric at the base of the thumb. Split that one. So a decrease on the second needle this time. Knit 3 and decrease. So that's back to 6 stitches. And this next round I decrease the last stitch on this one. So 1, 2, 3, decrease, and knit 2. So I'm now back to what I started with, the number of stitches I dropped for the thumb, which was 6 each. But I've got space because there's 3 more stitches at the base of that thumb than there is now. And that gives you width at the bottom of the thumb. So it doesn't pull, it's not tight. You have filled that gap at that side. There's no holes, there's no gaps. But here where you started, it always looks like a little bit of a gap, but you've got this end that you're going to fasten in, and you stitch that across here and close up that little gap that's there, reinforces it. And that's where the strain will be on your thumb, is here. So you've got an extra bit of reinforcing with that thread. Tying in. And then you can finish off your thumb. So I've done 1 finger and 1 thumb for you. It's the starting rows that's always the tricky bit. That's what makes your fingers or thumbs, or makes them tight. You can pause and rewind that bit over and over again, see what I did, and replicate in your own fingers. And hope you make good fingers.